Do you remember that smartphone with replaceable parts you could swap out once they wore down or got old? Or those bizarre glasses that were supposed to revolutionize the world? Not to mention the time when YouTube was supposed to become Facebook or a gaming platform, or hundreds of other Google ideas that were ambitious, ideas that would have been great if they had worked out. But in the end they turned out to be minor or major flops. Why is that? Welcome to the graveyard of Google's ideas, projects, apps, and concepts that started quickly and ended even faster. Enjoy the video. I really hope I don't have to remind you that Google started out as a simple search engine. Back then, when navigating the web wasn't as easy as it is today, their very basic internet services helped many people find exactly what they were looking for every single day. As traffic on their search engine grew, Google decided to use it not only to display ads, which later built their entire online marketing empire, but also to promote their other experimental services. Sadly, non-invasive. If you're already searching for something and you drop by so often, maybe you'd like to try our email services. Or maybe take some notes, find a dinner spot on Maps, or use our tools to do all sorts of helpful things. Google introduced their services gradually, and many of them gained genuine popularity. Some were too ambitious, others were aimed at too small group of users, and some simply tried to break into markets that were already oversaturated. You see, it all comes down to a simple fact that Google operates like some sort of an investment gambler. But it does in fact look like they're throwing money left and right at projects that just seem reasonable, hoping that 1 out of 100 failures will pay off all the previous losses and fund 1,000 new ideas. And this might sound actually really crazy until we realize that far more often than you'd expect, this strategy works remarkably well. Projects that Google has thrown money at, whether by buying small startups or by funding entire ventures from start to finish, including things like Google Maps or YouTube, which you're watching right now. The same goes for Gmail, Google Drive, Android, and their Pixel phones and accessories. Maybe Google Chrome or the entire Chromebook line built around their web apps. And then there are less famous but equally successful services like Google Ads, AdSense, and so on and so on. But now that we've covered the context and the logic behind these moves, let's finally get into everything that Google completely and utterly failed at. Google's biggest failure, especially in terms of public image, was their completely unsuccessful social media project, Google+. It was so doomed on every single level. The idea was simple: to compete with Facebook and other similar social media platforms like MySpace. But, well, that didn't really work out. It all started with jealousy, or rather with the fear that the rapidly growing Facebook would surpass what had long been the golden child of the internet, Google. People were now spending more and more time on social networks, so why not try creating one of their own? And so it began. Google Plus launched with a lot of hype. At first it was invite-only, which made it feel exclusive and sparked even more curiosity from onlookers. And then the gates were opened to everyone. A lot of people finally made accounts, poked around, wrote a bit, even posted a bit, uploaded some photos, and discovered that Google Plus was actually interesting. Cleaner than Facebook, more organized thanks to its circles system. You could, for example, add or remove people effortlessly, and everything worked smoothly. But most people who use Google Plus eventually also left Google Plus, and they didn't come back, because there was simply nothing to do there. No life. All these social network users were somewhere else, mostly on Facebook, and so the platform would have naturally died out on its own. But Google has decided that this can't happen. They shifted into the next gear. Since they controlled a large portion of the internet and had many users across their key services, maybe, just maybe, they could force people to use their social platform. And that's exactly how Google Plus became not just a failed social platform, but a full-blown symbol of how even if a corporation tries to shove something down people's throats, if users don't want it, they simply won't use it. period. Google Plus therefore turned into a symbol of user frustration because it was pushed everywhere. Have a Gmail account? Then you have Google Plus account too. Want to comment on YouTube? You must first create a Google Plus profile. Not only did this annoy regular users, but it also artificially inflated Google's Plus numbers, filling it with accounts that were created out of obligation, empty, lifeless, and meaningless. And so Google ultimately did something that nobody expected. A huge mega corporation that poured an enormous amount of money and energy into this project, which had caused users even more frustration, found itself sinking in terms of public image. And then they gave up. Google gave up. In 2019, Google Plus was officially shut down, and with it disappeared a fascinating little fragment of the very strange history of the modern internet. Everything was summed up in a single sentence from the official announcement. The service did not achieve broad user adoption, but the fact that Google Plus wasn't popular doesn't mean it was completely unused. The problem wasn't that nobody used the platform, it was that not enough people used it at the same time to make it truly useful for everyone else. And so around the time of Google Plus shutdown, I saw a few genuinely honest posts from people saying they did use it, they did meet people there, and that its closure was not only sad but downright irritating. As you might have already noticed, Google really can't compete in the traditional social media concepts. But the necessity is the mother of invention. They many times tried to revolutionize chats and online video calls from practically every possible angle in every possible way, and practically none of it worked out. You see, Google has always wanted to have its own messenger, its own WhatsApp, its own iMessage, its own FaceTime. And they tried. You have to give them that, they really tried. It all started with Google Talk, so-called GChat integrated into Gmail. Users liked it. It worked smoothly, it did what it was supposed to do reliably, and overall it was a simple, solid communicator. But for Google, it was too simple, not social enough, lacking video features and all the flashy stuff competitors were starting to offer, so they decided to rewrite everything from scratch. And that's how Google Hangouts was born. One communicator to rule them all, combining everything Google wanted to achieve into a single environment. In Gmail, in Android, in SMS, in the browser. And of course, there was also the cherry on top, Google Plus, which was supposed to unlock Hangouts' full potential. But instead of unity, there was chaos. Because alongside Hangouts, there were still traditional SMS apps on Android, the still active Google Talk in Gmail, and all kinds of other leftovers that cannibalized each other and pushed people away from using Hangouts seriously. And when you add strong competition into the mix, plus the fact that if almost nobody uses a given communicator, then even fewer people want to use it, it created an endless downward spiral. Ouch, my head hurts just thinking about it, so maybe let's take a deep breath for a moment. We need to think this through again, calmly. Allo Duo. What? Allo Duo. What language are you even speaking? Google Allo and Google Duo were yet another pair of communicators from I don't even remember what company anymore. Allo was a text messenger with an AI assistant and Duo was for video calls, but nobody gave a f. And then Google Chat and Google Meet, which for now still exist today. Chat is for text messages and for teams that normally work on Slack, and Meet is for video calls and conferencing. This time it has to work, trust me bro. And although when everyone hid at home in 2020, Google Meet suddenly skyrocketed because schools and universities were looking for an alternative to Zoom. But the confusion never really went away. People didn't know what to install, how to use it, what it was even called. And overall, it was just weird and extremely confusing. And so Chat and Meet have somehow survived to this day. And I guess they're staying for now? I don't know. Google will probably find new ways to overcomplicate things in the coming years. These days, it's mainly corporations and work teams that use them because private everyday users abandoned this circus long ago in favor of WhatsApp, Instagram and other messengers. And now something we all love the most. Amazing tech promises with ridiculous deadlines with no intention to ever deliver. The future is supposedly now, but when you look closer, it's more like a sci-fi comedy than flying cars. Ladies and gentlemen, Google Glass. It's 2012. Google is at its absolute peak. Sure, Facebook was breathing down its neck, but Google had to think in multiple directions at once. Android was dominating the market, YouTube was growing and finally stopping its endless losses, and the company kept trying its luck in markets that were increasingly strange and unconventional for them. And this is exactly how Project Glass was born. The goal? To replace the smartphone with augmented reality glasses that would become the natural next step, ushering us into the post-smartphone era. Sound familiar? It's an idea that still lingers on the market today, pursued more and more seriously lately by some very big players. And even though those companies now have many years of experiments, patents, technological development, and absurd amounts of money behind them, progress is still painfully slow. Apple Vision Pro? Cool device, sure, but everyone looks like a clown wearing it. And honestly, what can you really do with it that you can't do on a regular screen? Right now, the closest thing to functional mixed reality glasses seems to be Meta's Ray-Ban glasses. The ones MKBHD recently said are surprisingly good and soon to be widely available. So yeah, we'll see what comes of that. But more than a decade ago, you can probably guess that Google's glasses were doomed to be niche and ultimately to fail. The biggest thing that freaked people out was the idea that the final product looked weird and had a camera that could record anything at any moment. Today, that fear is almost funny considering the success of Ray-Ban Meta glasses, where Meta of all companies basically dominates the whole category, but back then the idea was so absurdly new and innovative that Google was simply too early. They were also too early in terms of technology. Even though the glasses looked futuristic, all the content appeared in a tiny little square off to the side of one eye. The device overheated and the battery lasted barely an hour or two. But futuristic space glasses wasn't the only project that Google has crashed. Let me present Project Ara. Do you remember that viral video where some guy pitches you the idea of buying your last smartphone ever? A phone that, unless you lose it, would last you for the rest of your life. Because if any part breaks, wears out, or if a newer, better version comes out, you can simply swap it out. Suddenly you're into photography? Replace the camera module with the best one available. Need more battery? Buy one and pop it in. Arrange all the parts like Lego bricks. Zero unnecessary purchases. Yeah, sounds too good to be true. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. The project Phone Blocks, created by some guy who just wanted to put the idea out into the world with a cool eye-catching promo video, quickly caught everyone's attention, including Google, which happened to have everything the creator didn't have: knowledge, technological infrastructure, and money. Lots of money. Google, more precisely their advanced technology and projects team, was already experimenting with modular hardware. But when the Phone Blocks video went insanely viral, that's when Google's designers, engineers, and decision makers realized this is something people really want. So they invited the creator of the concept, Dave Hawkins, to collaborate with them. And that's how Project Ara began. Phone Blocks effectively became its public-facing trailer. And then time passed and different mixed reports started reaching the public. It turned out the system had to be somewhat closed off to avoid compatibility issues. Then it came out that prototypes used too much power, forcing them to simplify everything and reduce the number of replaceable components. The projected production costs were also really high, and the potential profit much smaller than releasing a new smartphone every year with minimal changes. You know, the kind of changes you can still market as revolutionary. Because if you sell someone a device where every part is replaceable, the corporation earns less. At one point, Google even released a video showing off a new prototype, more realistic this time, with parts that slid in instead of snapping on like Lego. And it still looked impressive. It had that spirit of mission, customization, sustainability, all of that. But just a few months after that shiny teaser, the project was quietly abandoned at the end of 2016. And so smartphones locked themselves permanently into the form we all know today. The non-replaceable, hard to repair, uneco-friendly, throw away a bunch of perfectly good components just to get a few new ones model. But this wasn't Google's first rodeo with smartphones. Besides the fact that they simply created Android, the system itself wasn't even used by Google for a long time. But let me explain. Android is a Google system that anyone can use with the right symbolic licensing. And anyone can also put their own overlay skin, whatever you want to call it, on top of it. And the problem was that especially the early Android skins were horribly ugly, clunky, and full of pre-installed apps that only ruined the reputation of the little green robot smartphones. Yes, I'm talking to you, Samsung. You still haven't truly fixed this. So what did Google do? They decided to make their own smartphone. But making a smartphone isn't easy. So they partnered up with companies they already knew pretty well. Companies that were already using Android in their own products. These manufacturers would produce the next model of smartphones, but this time following strict Google specifications. And most importantly, with pure clean Android. This is how the Nexus line was born. And this is how my favorite phone ever, the one I still miss terribly today, the Nexus 5, came to life. That was peak of Android. That was peak of smartphones. Each model had its own set of flaws and strengths, but regardless of everything, they showcased what Android really was and how good it could actually look. But that was also the problem, the nail in the coffin for the Nexus line. These phones were being made by manufacturers who already had their own smartphone lines, meaning Google's Nexus devices were competing directly with their partners' phones. So those manufacturers eventually weren't so eager to keep working with Google once they realized it meant cannibalizing their own offerings. And so Nexus was discontinued. And that's how the Google Pixel line was born, a series of smartphones made fully by Google themselves. And they're doing reasonably well. Well, good enough that they release new models every year, so that's nice. Another impressive Google project that ended before it could even begin was their attempt to revolutionize the gaming market. Enter Stadia, a cloud gaming service where for a subscription fee you could play games on your laptop, TV, or basically anywhere by streaming them from some distant computer you were essentially renting through your subscription. Low latency, great quality, but still not really yours. Google even created its own game studio and its own controller, which actually looked quite nice, but many of the promised features never materialized. And it also turned out the whole thing wasn't as magical as it sounded in the marketing. Not only did you have to pay a subscription just to use someone else's hardware and stream the gameplay, you also had to buy the game separately at full price, meaning you were paying for something that could disappear the moment Google changed its mind. And well, they love changing their minds, let's be real. So the deal was just terrible. For the first few months, Stadia worked fairly well on a technical level, but emotionally it left a lot to be desired. Google simply didn't know who the product was for. Too strange and complicated for casual gamers, too limited for hardcore gamers, and too unreliable for publishers to develop exclusive titles for it. All of this meant very few people had a reason to stay longer than the initial let's try it phase. People realized it really was okay, but come on. Eventually in 2022, Google announced they were bored of the whole project and they would be shutting down the service soon. And in a surprisingly honorable move, players who had invested in games specifically for Stadia were automatically refunded. And what's quite interesting is that services of this kind, where you stream a game and pay a monthly subscription to use someone else's computer to play, do form a real functioning market. And it can be done in a way that's actually beneficial both for players and for the company providing it. A perfect example is GeForce Now, which is even available for free in a limited version, so you can test it out. The paid tiers remove ads, have fewer restrictions, lower latency, and better quality. And the biggest difference compared to Stadia? With Nvidia's service, you install your own games, the ones you already own on Steam, Epic Games, or elsewhere. So you're essentially just renting the computing power to play them, while the games remain in your hands, at least as much as the store's license allows. Or at least for as long as Gabe Newell is still alive and keeps corporate greed from destroying Steam. Google relies on the internet, and the internet can look very different depending on where exactly you're located in the world. In the US, for example, there are still many places where the internet is still really expensive and pretty slow, or even where there's no internet at all, and the local internet service providers have no real incentives to improve that situation. So Google decided to combine the pleasant saving the world with the useful increasing accessibility to the online services they provide, I guess, and they began an attempt to build their own ultra-fast fiber optic internet network, up to 1 gigabit for every home. Hey, internet democratization or whatever. Internet as a right, not a commodity, or a commodity but our commodity. Kansas City and Missouri were the first to agree to cooperate, so Google got to work quickly and started building its own fiber network entirely from scratch. No other tech giant had dared to do something like this at the time. And so the first residents began receiving insanely fast internet for what by US standards was ridiculously cheap, just a few $1,000s a month for the promised 1 gigabit. Everything ran beautifully, smoothly, wonderfully. The media and the public were ecstatic, but it was all just an illusion. Behind the scenes, things started to fall apart. Building a fiber optic network isn't exactly like creating an app or setting up a server farm. It's digging trenches, securing permits, acquiring land, managing tons of contractors, and handling endless agreements with cities, plus mountains of bureaucratic paperwork. Every new city added to the network meant years of planning, negotiations, and pushback from local, well-established providers who might have offered worse service but at much higher prices. Traditional big ISP companies also felt Google breathing down their necks, so they began actively lobbying against them to stop the tech giant's expansion. They even started lowering their prices, anything to make Google's life harder. Google was suddenly getting a crash course in the dirty business of providing internet access, and they had absolutely no idea how brutal it can be. Literal trench warfare instead of chilling in an air-conditioned office sipping coffee. On top of that, the costs were enormous. Hundreds of millions of dollars per city, which terrified Google's executives who were used to quick returns on investment. And so after that enthusiastic start, the expansion suddenly froze. Google Fiber operates today in only a handful of cities. Kansas City, Austin, Provo, Nashville, Atlanta, and that's basically it. This future-changing project meant to bring ultra-fast internet to everyone ended up becoming a niche service available only in select regions. However, the worst part is that Google never officially declared fiber dead. They just stopped talking about it. After years of stagnation, fiber has returned to a cautious form of expansion, only in select cities and with a clearly business-oriented approach, without any nationwide revolution. So the project still technically exists, but it grows very slowly. But fiber wasn't Google's only attempt at providing internet services. Years later, they also experimented with balloons, flying balloons that would beam the internet signal down to regions where building the infrastructure on the ground seemed much harder. Introducing Project Loon, Internet from the Clouds. A cloud in the cloud. The goal was to deploy hundreds of stratospheric balloons that would deliver internet to places where, for one reason or another, it simply didn't exist before. These balloons rose to about 20 kilometers above airplanes but below satellites. Each one was equipped with a miniature LTE base station and was powered by solar energy. The balloons moved by riding the wind, changing altitude to catch different air currents. And although it sounds like pure science fiction, Google actually did it. And for a little while, it really worked. The first test balloons were launched in New Zealand, and everything worked perfectly. People from remote villages connected to the internet using a signal coming from the sky high above them. It genuinely felt like a new, revolutionary way to connect the entire world. There was a lot of talking about millions of people in Africa, South America, and Asia who, thanks to Project Loon, would gain access to stable and fairly fast internet for the very first time. And so Google tested the balloons all over the world, in Sri Lanka, Brazil, Indonesia, Chile, and even in the United States. The balloons flew for months, linking together into one massive network and passing signals between one another. A single balloon could cover an area with a radius of 40 to 80 kilometers. Loon even became a hero during natural disasters. In 2017, it helped restore connectivity after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and in 2020 it provided internet access in Kenya during the pandemic. But even in the sky, basic economics still apply. Each balloon cost tens of thousands of dollars, not to mention maintenance, ground equipment, licensing, and paying a specialized team. Everything was simply expensive. And the revenue? almost non-existent. Governments and operators didn't want to pay for something they could do much cheaper on the ground. Meanwhile, alternative solutions started to appear, especially low-orbit satellite networks like SpaceX Starlink. These were better, more stable, and ultimately far more cost-effective. Compared to them, the balloons became an adorable but highly impractical curiosity, and so the project was shut down in 2021. Even though the technology was impressive and its mission was meaningful, Google simply couldn't find a viable business model for them. And so in January of 2021, Alphabet announced the closure of Project Loon. And finally, we can all see Google's different forgotten projects right here on YouTube. Remember YouTube Gaming, their attempt to declare a war on Twitch? A special subpage dedicated to gamers, Let's Players and streamers. But it all turned into a mess, everything blended together, and it became clear that YouTube Gaming just didn't make sense in that form, so they shut it down. Or YouTube Originals, when they wanted to turn YouTube into a kind of Netflix. Back when YouTube Premium was still called Red, I wonder why they changed that name. You weren't just paying for an ad-free experience, you also got access to exclusive series created by top creators who got real budgets and production resources. Everything was supposed to be prestigious, high-end, premium, but those professional series, films and documentaries made by the platform's biggest stars didn't perform nearly as well as Google expected, so the whole idea fizzled out. And then there were YouTube Stories, YouTube's attempt to be Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. You could post stories once you had more than 10,000 subscribers. Fast, lightweight communication with fans. Except almost nobody watched them because people come to YouTube for videos, not tiny throwaway snippets. You might not even remember YouTube Stories at all. That's how invisible they were. They had no dedicated section, no proper notifications, and the entire system felt strangely hidden in the app. I don't even remember if it existed on desktop. And now, in terms of recent news, YouTube is shoving AI down everyone's throat. Everything from titles to audio is automatically translated or dubbed. They're also introducing AI upscaling for older, low-quality videos, so instead of pixels you get some kind of Vaseline-smeared blur, and, well, maybe some of these features will catch on. But I feel like the community's resistance will eventually force them to dial back this obsession with injecting AI everywhere. Anyway, we'll see. And so Google keeps investing, firing shots at different projects here and there. And their latest shot, of course, is this whole AI thing. Long before ChatGPT, before the world even realized what AI actually is or what it could potentially do, Google Brain had already been working since 2011 on things like Transformer, the language model architecture that later became the foundation of models like ChatGPT, TensorFlow, a specialized AI framework used today by countless companies and models, DeepMind, which learned to play games at a human level and even defeated a human in the ancient Chinese game of Go. So it's easy to say that they were pioneers of the AI era. But the problem was that Google was far more conservative about releasing their technologies to the public. Instead of experimenting openly, they kept their models locked away internally. And then came the AI autumn of 2022. OpenAI released ChatGPT and the world went crazy. Google, which had powerful models for years but never exactly showed them publicly, suddenly panicked. According to many reports, the company declared a code red, gathering all AI teams to react as fast as possible and prove to the world they still had strong cards to play. For the first time in, well, ages, Google realized its position was seriously threatened. So in early 2023, in a rush, they unveiled their answer to ChatGPT, Bard. But instead of being a good comeback, it turned into a disaster, because Bard, during its very first live demo, made a factual error about the James Webb Telescope. Alphabet's stock price dropped rapidly, and so the tech giant that essentially invented modern AI panicked and tripped over its own feet. It took them some time to recover and do their homework, but eventually they returned with a more respectable answer, and that's where Gemini comes in. Renaming their model was meant to distance it from the Bard fiasco and show that Google wasn't giving up. And finally, their new model demonstrated Google's true potential. Though even then, there were still hiccups, because the model was extremely cautious in its responses. Too safe, too politically correct, too squeaky clean in that corporate way. Meanwhile, OpenAI and Anthropic were doing the same things, but bolder and much faster. Today, Gemini is finally pretty strong, and its video with audio generation models are absolutely top tier. Some experts even consider them the best in the entire industry. But behind the scenes, something else is happening at Google. The company that was built on an internet search engine is now killing the foundation of its own business model. The revenue from that core pillar, the thing they relied on for years, is dropping dramatically and will soon fall below 50%. And at the same time, Google is leaving behind the very people and websites it once heavily supported, completely out in the cold. Because here's the thing, Google earns money from ads in its search engine and ads on the websites it sends users to. So what's happening inside Google search today? Users no longer need to click links. They no longer need to click ads. AI now summarizes everything beautifully and increasingly accurately right there in the search engine. So website traffic drops, ad clicks drop, and the giant starts eating its own tail. Google created a future that threatens its own present. And the competition isn't sleeping either. OpenAI has recently unveiled its own AI-powered browser, Atlas. And this is exactly the direction technology, the world, and ultimately the entire internet is heading. Thank you for watching.